Max, I know you can't share any details, but I'm curious if you already have a general idea of the raid comps per boss, or if you just YOLO it the week of raid and it's totally gear dependent during splits. So Gallywix, you don't really know. Like, all you can do is kind of make a comp based on, like, generally what classes are good at, but, like, the specific niches that a fight requires, there's just simply no way you can know that right now. But yeah, I mean, I know what a really good general raid comp is, or I guess I should say we know, and also for specifically Muggsy and One-Armed Bandit, I think Styx also has a very specific comp. And then the early bosses are just like, anytime you're looking at a comp on an early boss, it's purely for loot. Now, when personal loot, this is kind of interesting. I don't know how many of you guys picked up on this, but when personal loot was a thing, so wait, when was the first raid that was master loot again? Was it a Myrdersil? Okay, it was Vault. Okay, so, or I guess group loot technically, but you can master loot it. So when personal loot was a thing, you had to show your hand immediately, right? Because the gear could go to any particular person and you had no control over it, generally speaking, for the first 3 or 4 bosses, it wouldn't really make any sense to kill a boss with anyone in the raid that you didn't feel like was going to kill the last boss. So you basically showed your last boss comp on, like, the very first boss. Now you don't really do that anymore. I won't say you move the comp around intentionally to deceive, but you can move in some extra classes for the specific fight because you only need a certain amount of people to soak up the gear for the last boss, and some bosses doesn't drop good gear for certain classes, so like they can sit. Like, we'll look for an early opportunity in a raid to like sit our demon hunter so they can do some mythic plus while we kill an easy boss, or do something like that, right? Unless there's like a piece of gear they need. Someone said group loot is exactly the same, just no hidden roles and much easier trading. That's technically true. So if you need every piece of gear that drops, let's just say you're in like a pug. So like a 30-man pug, personal loot and need for greed are the exact same thing. Like, you rolling need on a piece of gear that drops and it potentially going to you is the exact same thing as personal loot. It is the literal exact same function that happens for personal loot. It's just happening by you clicking roll. But in a guild setting, it's not. So when most people say they miss personal loot, they're purely talking about they miss not having any guild politics within like who gets pieces of gear, because some guilds will master loot because they have the option to, because it's just better and more efficient. But like, there are people in the guild that wish that wasn't the case, because like, I would like to say, if you care about like your guild's success, master loot is a good thing if it's done well. But like, there's just too many guilds where there's like bullshit favoritism and like corrupt loot council shit to where like, or even the suspicion of it, to where personal loot for a lot of people is like, they wish they had that. I think that's what they're saying. They're like, I wish in my guild gear just randomly went out and it wasn't like there wasn't some person in the guild deciding it. That's what they're saying, because it is a fact. Like, if you are in a random run, right, the gear dropping and rolling need is the exact same thing as personal loot, except it allows you to also trade it, where personal loot you can only trade it if like you got the item and then you didn't need it. Like, you already had something of the right eye level. But let's just say in personal loot, you got an item that was a trinket that you didn't have a trinket of that eye level yet, but that trinket wasn't better than what you had. You couldn't even give it to someone that it's good for, which was really bullshit. You could technically get more pieces if you're a lucky one. I don't think so. And another good thing about personal loot is it tailored your drops based on the raid comp, if that makes sense. So let's say you had a group of, like, you're doing a pug and you have 10 mages in a 20-man group, or not 10 mages, like 10 cloth wearers in a 20-man group. That's pretty rare. But let's just say that happened. Your drops are purely based on what everyone's loot table is in the dungeon. So like, if there's no hunters in the group, you're not going to get a bow to drop, which is a good thing, right? I guess you could argue it's a good thing. What group loot does is like, everything has a chance to drop no matter what. So you have to kind of build your comp around that. But I think that's also Blizzard's way of like creating loot diversity. Like, they want you to bring enough of everything. And if they make the certain amount of everything drop on every boss, you won't like ignore armor types or ignore classes where weapons drop and stuff like that. Wait, random runs, you also just get kicked for winning items at times, which personal loot you don't have to think twice. What? Like, if you're in a pug and like a trinket drops and you win it, you can get kicked? I want to say that sounds like something that like basically never happens, but also I don't pug as much as you guys do, so it's possible I'm out of the loop. I'd go out on a limb to say, I'm not saying this from experience. I'm purely just trying to judge human psychology here. That sounds like it's extremely rare, but does happen. But I would say like it's definitely, I would assume it's not common that happens. That would be my guess. But also I won't stand on it confidently because I just don't I don't pug a lot. Because usually when people do things, there's motive. There's like a logic behind what they're doing, even if it's toxic. Because like if you winning a really good item meant that you were now going to get another one, then kicking them, I guess, could make sense. But like if you're kicking them, you're bringing someone in who also hasn't gotten that item, then if there's another trinket or weapon that drops, you're less likely to, you know, I don't know. It just seems like such a strange thing to do. Like I'm running a pug, I really want a specific trinket, and it drops and someone else loots it and you're like, I'm so fucking mad, kick. That is like a lunatic to say. Like that person is like an absolutely miserable human being. Like top tier dog shit person. If they don't trade, then kick. Yeah, but like, I mean, if you make a group, I mean, I do this as a streamer, not to say that like me doing runs as a streamer is similar to like random people making runs or whatever. But like in the description, I'm like, hey, I'm taking this one fucking item, you know? So like if you say that in your description, people then have the choice to join or not join that raid. What you'll probably get is a lot of people to join the raid that don't need that item. But then you are kind of securing it for yourself. So I could see a world where you make a description and you're like, hey, I'm doing a pug raid. You don't have to join this, but if you do, I want this one trinket. And so by joining the raid, you're kind of being like, okay, leader man. And then that trinket drops and someone rolls on it. I could see that person getting kicked in that scenario because that actually makes sense. But I don't know how common that is. There is one way where I feel like the way that most people interact with raid, personal loot versus group loot, is group loot has some issues. And that is, what you could do is bring a friend who wants an item and all of your friends already have the item. Oh wait, but if that's the case, you can't roll need, right? If you have that item, or if you don't need that item, you can't roll need on something you already have, right? Isn't that how... I'm not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure that's how need for greed works. You can't roll need if you have the same or higher. You can roll need still, just delete it and restore after. Okay, so you have some ways to do that. Isn't it the same thing in personal loot though? If you were to bring those same friends, aren't you still adding people to the loot table that will get an item and then just like basically a bunch of people in a raid and personal loot are all rolling need on every single item no matter what. That's basically how that works. And then they can just trade it. So it's kind of the same thing, but you can't trade personal, or you can. Yeah, you can if it's the same eye level. It's always a chance you lose. You just don't see it. Yeah, I think dude, honestly, the reason I'm asking all these questions is like we haven't talked about personal loot in years because it's just been personal loot for more than 2 years now, or been group loot again. But when this was the case, it was a huge topic. And if I remember correctly, by far the biggest point of friction was people actually not understanding how personal loot worked. Like when you just explain it to them, they're like, oh, I see. But like they're just assuming, like basically it was like a boogeyman thing. Like for most people, it was, I am afraid that all this loot is going to get, people are going to ninja loot again and stuff like that because it became an option for the first time ever. I don't know exactly how much or how little that happens. But I remember at the time saying, I think the biggest concern that like legitimate concern people have is my guild was forced to be personal loot before, and now I feel like with the option they will not be personal loot, which involves loot council, which involves potentially favoritism, and that just involves guild, it just introduces guild politics that maybe weren't there before, and that could be a specifically annoying thing for you depending on what guild you're in. And that I could totally see. Like if like healers and tanks, hey, everyone likes getting loot, right? But if you're in a guild that does group master loot and you know what you're doing, a 15 eye level upgrade on any specific item is a better raid DPS. Like it's a better, your raid gets stronger decision to give it to a DPS over a tank and a healer. That's an objective. That is a fucking fact. Okay. It's always been a fact. So if you're a healer and a tank, you're like, hey, in personal loot, I got more loot. And that's true. And getting loot owns. So if you're a healer and a tank in a raid environment, it could totally make sense that you wouldn't like that. That adds up.